Hello, I am Centimus Prime, and here I will be reviewing the LEGO Creator set number 31130 Sunken Treasure Mission Part 2. Now, in my last video, I've done a review for the primary builds for this set. The builds that you see on the front of the box art, the ones that are most prominent. And so this video, and because this is a 3-in-1 sort of set, and I'm doing a review on it, there is more to this set than just those builds. So this is a build focusing on one of the other set of builds that this set has to offer, notably this one right here. And so, without further ado, we can go ahead and move the camera forward, and we can go ahead and start. And starting off with the minifigure, just taking off this for a minute. Here we have the minifigure, and this is just the minifigure we saw before. Still looks really nice. Still has that really nice printing. However, this time round, she is wearing the scuba gear rather than the skeleton wearing the scuba gear. But in addition of that, she also has this sort of dial thing. She also sort of has this gauge thing attached to her chest. Which, for those who've watched that last video, will remember seeing it in the interior of the submarine. So it's interesting how they carried over some things from that other build. Very neat. But in addition to that, she also gets this sort of camera build, this sort of camera accessory assembly sort of thing. And notably, this part of the camera right here is basically just the camera attached to the submarine, just with an attached to an additional little assembly, just clipped on like so, to make like this really neat like sort of under this like sort of industrial like lighting camera setup. Gives it like a more powerful light to use underwater. And she just holds it in her hand like so. Very neat. Very neat indeed. It's a big sort of camera setup, which is nice. Now, next up is the sort of coral build we'll be talking about next. And taking a good look at the coral, it honestly looks kind of pretty. I do like the various parts used to represent like various like random coral. Looks nice. It's a nice little rainbow of coral. It does look neat. I do think it looks kind of pretty. And turning it around, it still looks pretty good. But turning it around also reveals this sort of like hidey hole sort of thing, where yes, you pull this out, and yes, we get the skeleton from carried over from the last builds as well. This time around, he doesn't have any scuba gear. He's just holding one of the purple gems. And it's all good. It's all good. But in addition to that, he's also hiding a couple of these ingots, and this one's elevated by a couple of the 1x1 gold pieces, which I'm guessing is supposed to represent like more gold. And aside from that, it's just a basic like hole. It's just a basic like sort of cavity sort of thing. Like not too. It's like not. It's not that complex. It's simple. And in terms of like putting our Skelly boy in, you do sort of just push. You do sort of just like wedge him in, because he doesn't really plug in anywhere. He just sort of sits there. And I honestly don't mind it. He looks good doing it. So who am I to judge? In terms of what this rock of coral can do, it's not a lot. There are areas of this coral where you can hinge things around and like slide and hinge things back and forth. You can move things back and forth. You can like rotate them around a bit, but aside from that, there's not a whole lot of all that to it. It's really here to just look pretty, you know? Now, in terms of the building process, in terms of the building process, I will say that while it does have a couple of interesting things it does with some of the pieces, it's honestly mostly just the building process is mostly just mostly feels like you stacking bricks on top of each other, which is a simple way of building things, and that's totally fine. I will say it does, like building this, it does feel like you're haphazardly placing bricks onto a piece, which is like not like the worst thing you can do for a Lego set, but in terms of like if you want a set for a great building experience, you're not really gonna get that out of this build. And the skeleton has knocked loose, but that's fine. He can sit there. He's a good Skelly boy. Though I will mention is that during the instructions, I think I might have detected a misstep of some sort. And what do I mean by that is, so if we look at the instructions and we're focusing on step 31, where you place this green cone, okay? So the step tells you to place a green cone, just one, and you can see the So down here you can see that there are currently 2 green cones attached to this build. However, if we go to the previous step 30, where you place these parts down, guess what? You see neither of the cones here. And in terms of steps going forward, it doesn't mention anything about that part being placed down anywhere. What's actually happened here is that this step was supposed to tell you to place 2 of these green cones, but somehow it's only just the 1, which is odd. It does missteps in Lego sets, in the instructions of Lego sets, hasn't been unheard of, but it is interesting to see it firsthand, which is quite fascinating. But yeah, aside from that, it looks pretty, but it's ultimately a simple and kind of lackluster, sort of haphazardly put together sort of build. Now, moving on to the Stingray. And this Stingray, honestly, this build is the one that honestly kind of caught me by surprise. Because, looking at the builds of the sets, and especially looking at the Stingray, I initially thought that I wasn't really going to like the Stingray due to how the proportions are looking on that build. I thought that holding this Stingray would be like holding a burger. It would be it doesn't feel like it would. I feared it would not feel like something that would feasibly swim underwater. But after building it and holding it in my hand, it honestly doesn't feel that bad. I'm actually okay with the semi thickness of the overall body. Doesn't feel too burger like. It doesn't feel doesn't feel too thick. I'm guessing is a way I would have described it. And the tail, while simple and honestly not particularly how I would replicate a Stingray tail, it still gets the job done decently well, and it still has a good range of articulation, which I'll be talking about shortly. Now, something that did make me stop to think was the color used. I know that the sets are supposed to use the parts that they have on them, but this set made me question if stingrays, or manta rays for that matter, could naturally be red. And I looked up, and from what I've heard, they sometimes can. It honestly depends on what environment they're in, and and what temperatures and all this, and climates and all these different factors. But to my surprise, yes, sometimes you can find stingrays naturally in red, which is fascinating to me. Another thing that's honestly fascinating is when you look at the underside, it is looking honestly looks kind of robotic. It looks kind of mechanical to me. And I get what they were trying to do. They were trying to repurpose these vent pieces as this stingray's gills. But using the vents, it does give me a sort of mechanical vibe, and I honestly don't mind that. The fact that they used the gray for the underbelly does make these mixel ball and socket joint parts fit in a little bit better than in the octopus build. I do appreciate that. And while it is a nice little rounded build, there are a couple of interesting techniques when it comes to the builds. Interesting things to point out when it comes to the building process. Most notably, when I take this off, so one part of this build that fascinated me a good bit was how they were able to hold on, I lost my train of thought. Okay, gained it back. Then I lost it again. So one thing that fascinated me about the Stingray build was this simple little building technique that they use when they used these parts, how they attach these two parts, and then attach it like that, and then they would build pieces on the bottom. It's a simple yet surprisingly effective way to build upside down. I like it. Another notable thing about the build that I kind of like is how they repurposed these fender pieces to make it look like it has this creature has a nice natural mouth. Notably interesting. The mandible sort of things are a bit on the simple side, but they work. They're simple, but they work. The eyes, it does have eye details, which is nice. And one more thing about its building process that I honestly found quite enjoyable is that if you take off this part of the top of the Stingray, if you remove this, inside you see that crystal gem heart that you see from the safe. And I just thought that was a really neat inclusion for this build. I was that was really neat. I honestly enjoyed it. I also enjoyed that. I kind of liked it. That was really neat. So yes, this creature does have a heart of diamond. Yeah, it's a cute thing. It's a cute little inclusion for this Stingray's build, and I do enjoy that. It just makes me like the Stingray build a little bit more. Now, in terms of articulation, the fins here on the end are ball jointed, though are slightly restricted due to the overhang of these parts. So it doesn't really go up that much, but his fins still can go back and forth, and they can still rotate around. Don't mind that. You can still rotate them back. You can still swing them back and forth. Still looks nice. And you can make him look like he's like swimming. It's very nice. And for the tail, he has a ball joint. The stingray has a ball joint at the tail, at the base, a ball joint here, which can move a good range. A ball joint here, which can also move a good range. You get a rotation here, and you get a hinge here at the end. And despite this sort of joint looking a little unnatural, you can rotate this and have it so you can still rotate it naturally. Like, it's not that big of a deal. You get a good range of movements out of the tail, which is nice. I do enjoy that. So yeah, not a whole lot of articulation. It's mostly a nice little compact build. But the articulation that is there is very much appreciated. And now for my overall thoughts. I am honestly a little mixed with this part of the build. While initially I thought this would be my like least favorites out of the three out of this particular 3-in-1. I was honestly surprised with how well done. I was honestly surprised with how much I enjoyed the Stingray. I honestly quite enjoy it. The coral thing, on the other hand, well, it does look pretty, and I do like looking at it. Unfortunately, I wasn't really all that impressed with the building experience. And of course, the diver, she's an alright diver. It's nice to see her with more diving equipment and more like exploration equipment and stuff like that. Exploration gear and diving equipment. That's nice to see. But overall, I do like this. Overall, I do still like this, but I do still like this. It's still a nice. It doesn't really hurt the over, and it doesn't. It doesn't really hurt the overall like experience of the set. However, I can't help but to feel a little bit disappointed with this, despite how nice it looks. However, I will say that I was quite surprised with the Stingray and how like fun it is to play with. This is honestly like quite a pleasant surprise for me. So overall, yes, I do. So after this, yes, I do still highly recommend this set. But But hold on. Yeah, okay. Yeah. As I was saying, while overall, after looking at these two, overall I still recommend this set as a whole. I still do recommend this set. In terms of this build, I do recommend you to build the Stingray. It's a really nice animal build. The coral, on the other hand, while nice to look at, it's unless you don't mind the simplistic nature, the simplistic building experience. And if you don't mind the simple building experience, if you like the way the coral looks, I say unless you really like the look of the coral, and if you want to hold it in a 3D sort of space, or if you want this in a sort of underwater display, you have it for that too. It's a nice overall. This is a nice display piece. It's a nice thing to display underwater creatures with. It's just not that fast. It's just that the building experience is not really much to write home about. And I believe that is all I have to say about this portion of the set. And you can tune in next time when I review the third part of this Creator 3-in-1 set. But for now, that's pretty much gonna be it for this video. If you enjoyed this review, consider to like and subscribe, and maybe even comment if you want. And of course, I will be posting again sooner or later.